Hello everyone, welcome back to Automation 24/7. So today I'm going to start series on database testing. So database testing is basically a very important aspect in software testing. So we will be covering each and every phases of database testing in our channel. So today I'm going to start with part 1, that is basically overview, like what basically database testing is, what are the things we will be covering and what happens in it. Okay, like why do we need it, what basically happens. So just the overview we are going to cover. Gradually you will be getting videos of environment setup, how will you start with database testing, there are different components, what and when to do. Okay, we have different sorts of database like SQL, MongoDB. So which one, how to test MongoDB, how to test with SQL. So all the things will be coming up gradually. So today I'm just going to explain the overview of it, like how it works, just the basic idea and the basic overflow what database testing is and how we are going to do, why we are going to do it. Right. So let's start. So we will be covering 4 topics, okay, like 4 subsections you can say. So first one is we will be covering what is database testing. Then we will be discussing about user interface testing and database testing. Then we will be discussing about different levels of testing and then types of database testing, right? So let's start with what is database testing. Now we can say database is a storage area. So all the application data will be stored in the database. Okay, so it's basically a storage area where all of our data, whatever we're entering in the application or entering in any system, so all those data gets stored or all those information gets stored in database. Okay, now if you want to communicate with that database, then we have to know a language called SQL. Now here I am talking about only SQL. We have MongoDB, that is totally separate. Okay, so that I will be discussing. So here I have just taken the example. So if you are getting confused, don't get confused. I have just used the taken the example of SQL. So like if you want to, like if I have an SQL database, okay, if I have my SQL database, then I will be using SQL, structured query language, to communicate with that MySQL database. Okay, this is just an example. So MongoDB is something different. Okay, there are other databases also which are totally different from SQL. So take into instance like this is a MySQL database. So to communicate with that, we need to know some language, that is SQL. Okay, that is why I have mentioned here. Now if we want to communicate with the database, then we have to know a language called SQL. So this SQL, structured query language, we will be, so using this SQL, which is basically structured query language, we will be communicating with the database, which basically means we will be checking the schema, tables, triggers, etc. Now what is schema, what is table, what is triggers, I will be discussing later. Okay, so we have to create schema, we have to check the schema, we have to check the tables, we have to create data, we have to alter data. So there are different things. Okay, so to do that we have to use SQL, and using this SQL you can communicate with your MySQL database. So similarly with your MongoDB database, you will be using some other types of commands. So that's totally separate. Here just I have used an example. Now this is coming basically a type of backend testing. Why backend? Because you cannot see what's happening. It's totally like in front end. What happens? Front end basically UI. So UI testing, we basically use Selenium or Cypress or Playwright. So we use these different tools to automate the front end, which is visualized, which we can visualize, which we can see. But backend is basically we can't see what the database contains, right? So we can say that database testing comes under backend testing. Now let us discuss what is user interface testing versus database testing. So as per the image you can see the difference of it. So first let me just go through, then you can understand. Okay, I will be coming to the table later. First, let's me explain what it is written here, right? So in front end, which I was speaking right now, so in front end testing, we normally use the UI part. Like we have Selenium, we have Cypress, we have Playwright, etc. to automate and test the UI, the front end, right? Now UI testing involves checking the functionalities of an application, whether the button is working or not, whether the drop down is actually showing me all the elements or not, whether click operation is happening or not, whether any data which I have entered that is validating or not. So all these things we check in UI. And also we check the components like forms, graphs, menus, reports, etc. Now we have another form of testing which is API testing. Okay, so this API testing, in this API testing, what happens, we check how the UI, that means the front end, so we check how the UI will interact with the data with the help of APIs. Okay, so the front end, okay, they interact with the APIs. Okay, now how is the APIs interacting? Now take into consideration API is the waiter. You have gone to the restaurant and this is a very common example. So the waiter will basically take the order from you and give it to the person who is preparing the food, that is in the kitchen. So APIs, that is the waiter, are actually functioning properly or not, means the APIs are actually performing the function or not, that we perform in API testing using this Postman, Catalan, etc. So this comes under backend testing. Now front end testing, as you have known, we check the front end. API, we check the APIs. Okay, like how these are connecting to the front end and actually sending the response to the database, and also from the database how they're actually sending the response to the front end. So that testing of those APIs are basically called API testing. So that is done using Postman, Catalan and all these things, and API testing comes under backend testing. So front end testing, UI testing comes under front end testing, APIs comes under backend testing. Okay, so hopefully these two sections are clear. Now coming to database testing, it also comes under backend testing, which involves testing of backend components which are not visible to users. As I said, database is not visible to users. So any response that's coming to the database, or if database is sending any response, so those things, okay, like validation in the backend into the database, that is coming under backend testing. So this includes database components and DBMS systems such as MySQL, Oracle. As I said, MySQL, Oracle. So here we are discussing about MySQL, taking it as an example. We have Oracle, we have other databases also. Okay, so database testing comes under backend testing, which involves testing of backend components, the data which are not visible to users. This includes database components and DBMS systems. So if you summarize, front end basically is concerned with the UI, the functionality. Backend comes basically the APIs, how the APIs are functioning, and we have database testing, which basically checks the database objects. So we run some queries, we create some different like we check the different objects. Okay, like we create stored procedures, we create queries. So we create all these things to just check the database objects. So front end UI, back end basically we have APIs, and database to check the datas, actually database objects. So from this we can summarize the difference between the user interface testing and database testing. So user interface testing is basically, it is generally regarded as front end or GUI testing. Front end, as I said. Database is totally backend or data testing, which we can visualize. So backend, like what's happening with the data, with the information. So testing those data, testing those information. User interface mainly deals with testing of functionality and responses of web application and web pages. Database mainly deals with testing of data storage and retrieval from front end to database and vice versa. So as I said, so testing the data storage and checking the retrieval of data, response from the database, okay, to the front end, and vice versa. So that checkup is done in database testing. Okay, but in user interface, we are only concerned with the functionality and responses in the page itself, in the web application itself. Nothing to check from the backend, right? In user interface, we have like this testing type of includes invalidating the text boxes, select drop downs, as I said, navigation, so on and so forth. But in database testing, we check schema. As I said, we create stored procedures, we create tables, triggers, indexes. We check data duplication. Okay, database server validations. We validate the data duplication. So total data testing, which is totally concerned with the database, and this is concerned with the front end. Okay, so we can conclude what are the differences between the user interface testing and database testing, and what we do check through the APIs, right? Moving on to the next subtopic. Now here I have discussed something, like I have shown you a picture which you can visualize properly. So here basically we will be discussing on the different levels of testing. Okay, so this picture represents the total flow, the different levels of testing. Okay, so what happens basically in GUI or API testing? Okay, GUI means, as I already showed, okay, like user interface, graphical user interface, or API testing. What happens? The client, basically the application or the system, it sends some requests to the server, then server responds. So this testing comes under like this basically, here we basically cover the APIs, like the API testing, what APIs are actually sending the request and getting the response from the server. So these are all covered in API testing. And in GUI, we basically are checking all the automation things like front end validation, user automation. So like UI automation, those are covered in GUI, and in API we do the API testing. So this section, first we are checking what is happening in the pages, like the front end validation, and also the API, using the API testing we check whether the APIs are working or not. Now after that, what happens? This web application connect to our application servers, and here we connect to our database and we do the database testing. Like we run the schema, we create stored procedures, we create indexes to check whether the information, like the client information, the data is perfect or not, and there is no error. Like the data should be there in such a way as per the logic. Okay, now what happens after database testing? So this part is normal, like what we discussed previously. So whatever I covered here in what is database testing and what is UI, API, and database testing, so all these are covered up to this section. So I'm repeating once more. Here what we do, here we automate the UI of the client, I mean the front end, using Selenium or Cypress. Then we check using the API tools like Postman, Catalan. We just check the APIs are working or not. So we check like the request and the response are coming properly or not. And after that, here in the database, we check like the information are correct or not, and the data retrieval or like the logics are perfectly working or not. Okay, and all the possible datas are containing the proper validations or not, like the validations are working or not. So all those things we have covered till now. What happens here? Now after this, what we are seeing in the image is extracting, loading, analyzing, ETL testing, BI testing. So before jumping into this, because you guys might be getting confused, so let's check this point. Okay, so here it says excuse me, so here it says based on the schedule. Okay, now this database might be in Kolkata, this might be in New York, this might be in Mumbai. So the database might have different branches, and this database might have different branches, and they might be in different locations also. Like as I said, one database might be in Kolkata, one might be in New York, one might be in New Delhi. Okay, so why am I speaking all this? Like, what is related to that? So what we do, we extract those data from different data servers or different data branches or different data database, not data basically, like the different database branch or the database in different locations. We extract those. Okay, we extract those data and put it in a staging area. Okay, now this part is totally business logic, because whatever is happening in this production, we need to check the business logic also, like as per our business in the company for the product, it is working fine or not. So we basically are covering these things here, and that is what is regarding ETL and BI testing. Okay, so we connect to the different databases which might be different branch or in different geographical locations, and we extract those data and we put it in a staging area. Okay, now in this staging area we apply some rules. Okay, like some transformational rules, certain rules on this data, and to push, and then we push this data into a data warehouse. Now transformation rules, like certain rules are imposed, okay, in the staging area to check like whether those are actually working as per our business logic. Okay, so we apply those in the staging area, and after that we put them into the data warehouse. Okay, so it is this data warehouse where all this transactional data will be stored. So here we don't have all the client information. The client information is in these databases, which might be in different locations. Okay, one is in Kolkata, one is in New Delhi, one is in Mumbai. So here we have the exact client location, but here we don't. We just have like some extracted data. Okay, or you can say some dummy data into which some rules has been applied, and the rules has been applied on the staging area, and then this has been pushed through data warehouse. So this is data warehouse where we do the ETL testing. Okay, we do the ETL testing. Okay, now after this ETL testing, we do the BI testing. Okay, so after this ETL testing, we do the BI testing. So let me make you clear once again. So this is the normal production, what happens. So developers are building, like say the front end is building the pages, the back end is building the logics, and automation engineers, they are first automating the client side, then they are doing API testing using the APIs to check whether the APIs are actually working or not, connecting properly to the server, sending requests properly to the server, and also getting proper responses from the server or not. After that, whatever data requests are being sent to the database servers, those database testing also they are doing. So this is something what's happening in the production. Now ETL testing and BI testing is occurred to extract the data, okay, to check whether things are working or not. Okay, business is working or not, the logic is working or not. Like if they are seeing like whatever the business they have made, or they have designed the product or designed the database in such a way that's not making enough profit for the company, so they will change some logic into that, and for that basically we have this ETL and BI, business intelligence. Okay, so this basically is not at all attached to database testing. Database testing is what happens here. So the four levels are basically this GUI API testing, database testing, what happens here, then ETL, then BI. Now in BI testing, we actually do all the analysis. After getting the data from the data warehouse, we get the analysis like, okay, the logic what we have applied previously will not work for, say, will not work for Indian holidays, it will work during the Christmas time. So we will change something in this application or change something in the database that will gather more information, and these customers will be able to get the benefits, and so our company will be profitable. So this analysis is being done in BI, okay, where quality analysts are not directly involved in it, okay, not the developers, okay, we have separate people for that. And ETL testing is basically we check in the data warehouse. There are different ways of doing that, okay. So this is the picture, and that is what is written here. So in GUI testing, API calls will be triggered, and those API calls will hit web server, finally hit database, blah blah blah, and the same thing what I've told you. So data will be extracted here in the staging area, then it will go to this warehouse where we will be checking using this ETL testing, okay, using this ETL testing, and then we will be analyzing in BI. Okay, so these are the four levels of testing. Coming to the types of database testing. So till now what we discussed, before going to types of testing, let me just summarize. So we discussed what is database testing here, then difference between user interface and database, the four levels of testing. So all these four levels are required. If this is required for the benefit of the functionality of APIs and client, if database testing is important for the database checkings, so is ETL and BI important for the business logics, okay, that also we discussed. And finally we will be covering types of database testing. So database testing is basically divided into two sections, white box and black box. White box basically called structural. So in structural database, which involves the checking of components, like we do run SQL commands and check the stored procedure. So to do the white box testing in database, we need to know SQL or whatever, like for MySQL I'm talking about, we need to know SQL. For other databases, if there are any query languages, that we need to know, okay. So we need to create stored procedure, okay. So good command script knowledge is required. And this structural database testing, okay, it involves those components of database which are not exposed to end users, okay, like the end users, they don't get to know what happens, okay. So only the technical team, the quality analysts team, or the database testers, they do check thoroughly by running scripts and doing creating functions, creating indexes, so on and so forth, right. So rigorous schema testing. Coming to architectural testing, if you consider, so basically black box testing, now that is divided into two parts, functional and non-functional. In functional, we create some operations, we do data mapping, we do data integrity, we do run DML commands, GUI with respect to GUI applications. So some operations we do. And in non-functional, we do performance testing, we increase the data load, okay, we check the security of the database, how much is our data secured. So all those are coming under non-functional. So functional as well as non-functional is basically what it gets covered under black box. So black box, basically architectural testing, involves testing interfaces and the integration of the database. So mapping of data, as I said, verifying incoming data, verifying outgoing data, okay, how much is your data secured, okay, if I put stress, is it able to handle that stress, is it able to handle that load, is it able to, like in functional we check the integrity of the data, okay, how much data is incoming, how much it is outgoing. So these all black box testing we do perform, and that is architectural, that comes under architectural. But in structural, we just run the commands and check whether the data are coming properly or not. We create some functions and just check things are in proper or not. But here it's a more deep level thing. So this is what basically types of database testing is, mainly white box and black box. White box also known as structural, black box also known as architectural. Structural mainly covering schema, architectural, functional testing and non-functional testing, which are these as follows. So hopefully you guys understood why we need database testing. Okay, importance of it. Okay, what it is related to with other levels of testing, and also explain the flow, and this diagram is very important. So I will be continuing this series. So part 2 is basically the environment setup that I will be coming up very soon, and after that there are different tutorial videos of database testing that will be coming. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the overview of database testing. So here I mainly covered about MySQL. I would be also covering MongoDB, right? So thank you guys for watching. Please do write me in comments if you have any queries, and also do let me know if you're liking the video, and please do like, subscribe and share automation 24/7, all the videos of this channel. Thank you. Have a nice day.